Well, good morning, scholars. I just want to make sure that I am recording this okay. I am going to make a short video for you explaining Ms Mack's teaching. Ms Mack is one of our exemplary teachers. She was a dream keeper from Mississippi, and she taught both before and after the Jim Crow racial segregation times and then the desegregation times. So she was working under really difficult conditions all of the time. And yet she was very successful with students that other teachers continued to fail with. And we still have those kinds of teachers today, and we call them exemplary teachers. They do three things in their teaching. They're not cookie cutters where everybody's doing exactly the same practices, but they have the same principles in their classroom. So I want you to begin to learn to pick those three things out. Because remember, you need all three of those characteristics that Dr. Ladson-Billings explained to us about exemplary teaching. She calls it culturally relevant teaching. In the years since she started her research, and others of us who are also researchers, including myself, we have continued to research this topic of these exemplary teachers. And so some people have started calling it, shifting it from culturally relevant to culturally responsive, and then it's become culturally sustaining. And there's reasons behind each of those word choices, which I'm not going to get into right now, but we will talk about that. Okay. And so the important thing to remember is that if the teaching is exemplary, now I'm not talking about good teaching, mediocre teaching, poor teaching. If it's exemplary, it has to have three things. It has to have high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competence, which means walking in two worlds. And it also has to foster that high levels of criticality. Dr. Ladson-Billings calls it the so what factor. Dr. Mohammed calls it criticality. So we'll get more into that with each of those three components. But for right now, I'd like to share my screen with you so that you can see. Let's see. So let me see if I can. Here we go. Okay. All right. So you have this document also. It's called Big Mama and Ms Mack. These are two exemplary teachers, and they're both from Mississippi. Both of them have passed now. But I knew Big Mama personally. She came to the University of Utah. I went to school with her son, Dr. Cleveland Hayes, and we were both school teachers in Salt Lake City School District, and he taught in middle school at Glendale Middle School in Salt Lake City School District, and I taught at Emerson Elementary and then at Franklin Elementary in Salt Lake City School District. So when I went to Franklin Elementary, my students would graduate from elementary school and go to middle school, and that's where my friend Cleveland was a science teacher. And then we actually met each other at different district of professional development, and then we were in the same doctoral program and became really good friends, and we have stayed friends, and we have been colleagues and co-researchers. And so Big Mama, if you are familiar with the South at all, there's a lot of families who have a Big Mama in their family. And so this particular Big Mama is from Mississippi, and she taught for over 50 years. Her story is amazing, as she grew up and how she managed to get through enough schooling to become a teacher, to graduate from high school, and then to get a teaching certificate. And so she taught for over 50 years, and she went to the University of Mississippi, I think, or maybe it was Mississippi State, and she re-credentialed, did more of her studies. So she just was an independent learner, and she just continued to want to be hungry for more learning herself, and to continue to work with young people. So that's who Big Mama is. And then her colleague was Ms Mack. So I was not able to meet Ms Mack personally, but my colleague, Dr. Hayes, Cleveland Hayes, he did know her, and she actually was the teacher of his dad as well. So I'm going to look at Ms Mack and analyze her teaching for those three characteristics of exemplary teaching, and then you're going to analyze Big Mama's teaching up here. Okay, so I'm going to show you how it's done, and then you're going to have your turn to do it. Okay, so Ms Mack, like Big Mama, Ms Mack is also from rural Mississippi. We, the authors, that was me and Dr. Hayes, were introduced to Ms Mack through one of her students, himself now a retired teacher. So we were interviewing this retired teacher, and he was talking about his teacher, Ms Mack. He talks about his experiences with Ms Mack during his youth as a K-12 student. He said, quote, "When I was in the 10th grade, Ms Mack was the driving force. I didn't apply myself. I didn't apply myself because there was no one to pull me out. She was like a dentist extracting a tooth. She could just pull it out. Sometimes it was painful, but yet she could still pull it out. She was honest. She was fair. Coming from where I came from, rural Mississippi, I had been dealt a lot of unfair teachers. I thought they were all like that. But then I saw her, Miss Mack, and I began to make honor roll grades and good grades. She could have looked at me as a poor country boy, but she understood." Okay, so we get some sense from Miss Mack's student, what her teaching was like. Okay, what are those three things that we're looking for from exemplary teachers? One, we're looking for high levels of academic achievement. We're looking for high levels of fostering cultural competence. We're looking for high levels of criticality, or that so what factor. Let's see if we can go back into Miss Mack's teaching as it was reported by her student and see if we can see it. Okay, so first we're looking for high levels of academic achievement. Do we see any evidence of that here in our review from her student? Well, she says or he says, her student says that he began to make honor roll and good grades. So we know that he wasn't doing that before. He said earlier that he didn't apply himself, and that she came in and she was like a dentist extracting a tooth. So she was just like a warm demander. She was warm but demanding that she would be expecting the highest potential from him. So there is evidence that she was fostering high levels of academic achievement. We don't necessarily see exactly what she was doing, but we do get some evidence of that she was doing it. We know that she was insisting that her student could do better, and she pulled him, and she encouraged him and supported him. She had high expectations from him, and she clearly helped him to achieve because he began to make honor roll and good grades. Okay, so we do have some evidence there, how he didn't apply himself. She pulled it out of him. So and then he was able to start doing it himself. So it sounds like he was more of a dependent learner, and that she helped him to become an independent learner. So he was, not applying himself, and then he did apply himself. So she started with the learner. She saw he had abilities, and she pulls this out of him, and she is warm and demanding excellence from him, and he does it. Students are pretty amazing that way. They will live up to your expectations of them. Okay, so characteristics number 1, high levels of academic achievement. Yes, we do see that. Okay, how about high levels of cultural competence? What does cultural competence means? It means walking in two worlds. So we get some sense of that. Do you remember the story of Matthew, where Mr. Frank Finnegar was his teacher, and Matthew knew how to bait a hook, he knew how to fry fish on the rock, he knew how to set traps. So he was very, very good about that. But his teacher, Mr. Frank, didn't feel that Matthew was doing well in class. Like, he wouldn't work in the centers, he wouldn't turn in assignments. And so then his father asked him, well, do you know how to set a trap? And Mr. Frank said, no, I don't. Well, Matthew's father said that he would definitely be willing to teach him to do that. So you see here in Matthew's story, walking in two worlds, walking in Matthew's home world, where he's got all these skills. He's a very good trapper. All these skills are valued in his community, but then he comes to school, and what his knowledge is, and his dad's knowledge, is not in the school and not valued. It's not in the centers. It's not on the tests. It's not what Mr. Frank could see. Well, fortunately, Mr. Frank learned how to pivot to start with the learner, not the lesson plan, because Mr. Frank had been working on the lesson plan and not so much on Matthew. So then he learned, well, let me start with Matthew and make my lesson plan around Matthew so that Matthew can walk in both worlds. So do we see that here? Where is Ms. Mack's student? Is he learning to walk in both worlds? What evidence do we have here? Okay, well, we know that this student comes from Mississippi. He says, I came from rural Mississippi. And I know myself, I am from Alabama, and we always us jokingly say, and sometimes we're not really joking, we'll say things like, woo, thank goodness for Mississippi, because it's often Alabama and Mississippi will be at the bottom of any kind of ranking of the 50 United States. Alabama will be 49 and Mississippi will be 50. So we often will say, thank goodness for Mississippi, being Alabamians. So, he's noticing, he's saying something about where he's from in rural Mississippi. And so we also get some sense here of the cultural competence, because he says that before having Ms. Mack, now remember, he's in the 10th grade, so he's gone through a lot of schooling, and really he could have already dropped out. Some kids do drop out before they even get to the 10th grade. So this student actually was kind of enduring school, and he says that before he met Ms. Mack, that he had been dealt a lot of unfair teachers. So his teachers that he had were, they reflected the school. Whatever they did and didn't do, they did not seem to have any value for rural Mississippi culture, right? Because he says his reality is his perceptions of it. He says, I had been dealt a lot of unfair teachers. So much to the fact that he thought that all teachers were like that. He just expected teachers to be unfair and to put him down. And we get some more evidence of that here, where he says, she could have looked at me as a poor country boy. So we get the sense that all of these teachers he saw as being unfair, they just looked at him as a poor country boy. So rural Mississippi, a poor country boy, plus he's Black, right? So you have that racial component and then the economic component of being poor. So the other teachers, it sounds like that they have very low expectations for him. And we know that research does show that teachers tend to have low expectations for kids that don't match the white middle class English speaking norm that they see as, well, that's normal. That's how you should act and be. So if you don't fit into that, then there's something wrong with you. Your parents don't care about education, or all kinds of deficit talk. So here we get some sense that Ms. Mack is teaching him. She's like, he says she understood. So she understands that he's from a rural Mississippi background, but she doesn't see that as a problem or a deficit to be fixed. She sees that as a resource and a richness to bring into the classroom. And we see that she does that because he says that she treats him fairly, and she understands what his background. So she doesn't look at it like, oh, bless his heart, he's from the country, he doesn't know anything. No, she sees his potential, his gifts. She knows that, just like Matthew did coming from the country, she knows that he has a lot of talents as well. So we see evidence of cultural competence, that she's helping him to be able to walk in the school world and the white middle class world, which matches the school, and in his own world, just like Matthew. So he should be able to be Black and from the country in Mississippi and successful at school. He shouldn't have to divest himself of being pretending that he's not Black and that he's not from the country in Mississippi. Okay, so think about the butterfly girl story also, where she her teacher was like, no, we don't kill butterflies, they're beautiful. And she knows that actually butterflies are bad because they kill the crops. And so her teacher needs to learn, well, that the butterflies girl can be a girl from the country who knows that butterflies are actually bad for crops and successful in school. So she can learn to be like, oh, well, butterflies, they can be beautiful as well. They hatch, they have a cocoon, they hatch. There's that whole biological process that we can understand that. But we also understand that that butterflies do kill the crops. So we do see evidence here of the cultural competence in Ms. Mack's classroom. So she's got high levels of academic achievement. She clearly expects them, and she fosters and supports them so that she brings them to high levels of academic achievement. And it sounds like the cultural competence, she definitely has high levels of cultural competence, because her student is saying, well, she's very fair. She could have looked down on me as a poor country boy, but she sees that as a richness and some gifts that he brings to the classroom. So she started with the learner, not the lesson plan. Right? And so you can see how academic achievement and cultural competence are tied together, that understanding cultural competence helps foster high levels of academic achievement. So we for sure have the two of the three. Now, you can be a good teacher, even a great teacher, if you have high levels of academic achievement And then you get even better when you have high levels of cultural competence. But you are not exemplary until you have high levels of that third factor. This is the one that teachers often have the toughest time with, because most of the time it is not something that they are familiar with. And so they don't have experience with it. It's new to them. So they often struggle with it. But you can learn it too, because Ms. Mack, or excuse me, Dr. Ladson-Billings, when she was doing her first studies in the 1990s on cultural competency and culturally relevant teaching, she started out with about 8 teachers, and she was like, what makes these teachers so successful that they are able to be successful even with the students that other teachers continue to fail with? And she said, there's 3 things that they always do. They always foster high levels of academic achievement. They always foster high levels of cultural competence. And the third thing is they always foster high levels of the so what factor, the criticality. Now, even though this is often hard for teachers because most of our teachers are white and most teachers don't learn this from their life experiences, oftentimes children, even from white backgrounds, will often have a good sense of this. Like if you've ever been around little kids, they have a quick sense of when things are unfair. They'll call it out and they'll say, hey, how come he got that and I didn't? They're real quick about looking for issues of equity and unfairness and kind of like why something matters. They'll often even ask, why? Why do I have to know this? Why do I have to do that? So kids are usually pretty quick about this, and they enjoy it because they're much smarter than most adults give them credit for. Even you think about little Ruby Bridges, and she was just 6 years old, and she was walking through the crowd to be the first student to desegregate a school in Louisiana. And she knew, even though at her developmental level, she was only 6, you have to think about developmental level, but she knew something important was going on. And she would thought, something was happening. So kids often are very aware, even kids as young as 3 years old, they know that skin color matters. Like they know body size is different, and it matters differently. Like if you're in the grocery store and your child is in the shopping cart and they say something like, look at that guy, he has no legs. They will say it out, but they get socialized as they get older to not talk about those kind of social differences and how they matter in our society. But we all know it. We just learn not to talk about it. So kids often from K through 12, and they know that these things exist, and they often want to talk about it, but they're often shushed by adults or penalized. Don't talk like that. And so they're silenced a lot when it comes to that. But they naturally, if you just listen to kids, a lot of times they will say things like at a high school I was at a couple years ago. It's an all-Black high school in Mobile, Alabama, and the students have a very strict uniform code, and that's a very working class area, and a lot of times it feels like a prison more than a high school. And the students will tell you, if you would stop thinking so much about the size of my earrings and teach me, uh, we might actually get more done here. So you have this incredible analysis from the kids. And as a kindergarten teacher, I took my students to the local dentist, and one of my 6-year-old little students said, teacher, why are the dentist helpers girls and the dentists are boys? And so she had a strong gender analysis at 6 years old. So, kids often get this. It's a little harder for teachers, but it doesn't have to be hard. Um, the teachers that were in Dr. Ladson-Billings' study that all did this, some of them were actually white. I believe there were 3 teachers in the original study that were white. So they were exemplary teachers, part of that original group of students. So do we have any evidence for criticality in this, according to Ms. Mack's student? So as we look here, I would say, just the fact that being poor and being from the country is clearly seen as a problem, a deficit, something that he's been devalued for. Ms. Mack knows that, and she does not do that. That's why she's fair. She's able to help him to walk in both worlds because she knows that people devalue the rural areas of Mississippi, particularly if you're Black. So she is aware of that unequally valuing of if you're from the country or if you're from the city. And then you see the economic here with poor and country. That seems to be where this student, his experience has been that being poor and coming from the country have been a problem, that teachers have been very biased against him. And it may be just implicit bias for sure, but they've definitely been biased against that. And she knows that. She addresses that by intentionally using that as a positive resource rather than a deficit in him to be fixed or ignored or have low expectations for him. Okay, so we do see all three of those characteristics. We do see high levels of academic achievement. We do see high levels of cultural competence here. We do see high levels of criticality, that so what factor. She knows that he's from the country and he's from a poor family and community. So she knows that people have low expectation for him, but she wants him to develop his gifts. So we do see evidence there of exemplary teaching, not just one of those factors, not just high levels of academic achievement, not just high levels of cultural competence, but all 3: high levels of academic achievement, high levels of cultural competence, and high levels of criticality. So all 3 of those are there, and we have evidence for those in just this little statement. Okay, now it's your turn. You're going to look at Big Mama, and you're going to do the same thing. Go through and see if you can find all 3 levels of exemplary teaching. And I will tell you that they are there. I want to see if you can pick them out. Okay? Alrighty, I hope that was helpful. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go ahead and end this. Have a good day.